Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today. Today, we'll be covering planning your Microsoft 365 compliance, where we hope to share some of the features that are available and how you can start utilizing Microsoft 365 compliance functionality. So a quick introduction about what we're looking to cover today. So we'll do an introduction. We'll talk about Valto. We'll do an introduction to what compliance is and recently how it's been renamed to Purview. We'll also then talking about planning your compliance strategy. Then we'll move into a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please just drop them into the Q&A chat and we'll answer those questions at the end. So just a quick little bit about Valto. So Valto are Microsoft technology specialists. That's all we do. We're based in Chester and London. We recently opened up a new office in America as well. And we basically focus on technologies that include Power Platform, SharePoint, obviously Microsoft 365 solutions like compliance. We've got a lot of different awards, historically Microsoft Gold partners, but also now solution partners. We've worked on a huge amount of varying projects within Microsoft 365. In terms of introduction to compliance, so recently the Compliance Center, as it used to be called, was renamed to Purview. So the idea of this change was basically to consolidate all of the tools that relate to governance and protection of your Microsoft 365 data into one platform. Purview, just at the bottom there, is basically the scope of influence or concerns of something. So that's the definition of what that means. But ultimately, it was to simplify the terminology and consolidate some of the portals that we have available to us into one solution. Just to cover off in terms of what you have available to you. So one of the most popular licenses that we offer to organizations is the Microsoft 365 Business Premium plan. Now, this is a great plan for organizations that have 300 users or less, and it basically includes all of the compliance features that I'm going to cover off today. It doesn't include some of the E5 plans, but what you will see is that Microsoft 365 Business Premium and Microsoft 365 E3 are comparable. They have exactly the same functionality that can be. There is some minor differences between the two licenses, but what I will cover off today is included in both plans. We've also got the Microsoft 365 E1, just flagging there that there is some functionality available, but not everything. And of course, the Microsoft 365 E5 plan includes everything. So there's a couple of additional features that we have. There is a link just down the bottom here. So if anybody wants to get a more comprehensive view of what those licenses include, they can jump on that website or get in touch with ourselves. We'd be more than happy to talk through what licenses you have available to you now and what the features are and what you're able to do with those. So the first thing is we have two types of scores, or potentially even three types of scores that we're able to measure within the various admin centers of Microsoft 365. We've covered off on a previous session what's called the secure score. That allows you to see how you're doing from a security perspective, and then obviously make changes to improve that, especially as you get new features added into 365. It's a great way of keeping on top of making sure you're implementing those. The second one, which I'm talking about the different scores, is you do actually now have a adoption on productivity score. So that can measure how much you're using things like Microsoft Teams, even measures if you're having too many meetings as an organization. So it's another good one. Today's main focus is the compliance score. So this can give you a score of how many points that you have currently. See on this image over on the right-hand side, and how many points that Microsoft currently have. So if you're looking to be compliant with an industry best practice like 9001 or 27001 is probably more applicable to this, then Microsoft can make a whole host of stuff to their data centers. So for Microsoft to be eligible for 27001, they'll have to have secure data rooms. Obviously, because this is a cloud service, you as a customer will have no, you won't be able to impact whether there's security systems in place in their data centers. So Microsoft have covered everything off from their side. but you'll obviously need to cover off actions as well from your side. So if we just jump into the live version of this, what you'll see here is we have the compliance manager view. Now, what the compliance manager view basically allows you to do is see where your current score is. So it's showing in this tenant what our current score is. So we only have 27 points out of 5,237. And Microsoft have got the majority of the points there. Now, what we can do that's interesting within this section is we can jump into assessments. So if your organization's aligned to a regulation body like ISO 27001 is really popular here in the UK, or you might be more aligned to one of the American ones over as well, which you can see here. But the great thing is you can jump into the 27001 assessment and you can see everything that you're currently scoring against in here and whether you're testing. So as you can see, Microsoft have pretty much got the majority of the points for what they've done. So they've kind of ticked the boxes for you to be 27001 compliant. However, there's a whole host of things that you would need to do to be compliant. And we can jump into the controls section and we can see all of the recommended controls that we need to implement. So this access control policy is a great one. We can see here that currently Microsoft have completed their actions. However, I can go in and I can see there's a number of actions that are waiting for us to confirm. If we were to just pick on this one for now, employ least privileged access, what we're able to do is we can see all of the actions in here, and it's actually a tool that can be used to manage this moving forward. So the person who would be responsible for this at Valto would be Robert. So I can actually search within our Microsoft 365 environment, and I can select Rob from the list. And I can obviously then start to do some of the scoring that's related to this as well. So you can see I can move to implementation details. I can say that we've got this implemented, we've implemented this today, and we assessed the policies and implemented blah, 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 blah. So it's a great way of kind of, as an auditor, or if you're responsible for managing this process within your organization, giving you a pane where you can see exactly the policies and the processes that you need to configure. And if you've kind of got multiple, so if you've got more than one in this list, they will go over each other. So as you tick the least privilege policy within there, that will also impact the other ones. So you don't have to repeat the same actions. So yeah, the compliance manager gives you that view. It's able to show you your current score and it can show you what you need to do to improve that. Jump back into the presentation. Another great thing that this would do is also show regression. So if people are making changes in the environment, perhaps enabling policies that should be implemented, this could show you regression where your points have actually gone down or increased on a month-to-month basis. The next tool, which is kind of beneficial, which can help protect data, is conditional access. So if we just jump into conditional access just here, what conditional access allows us to do is basically manage how Microsoft 365 can be accessed. So obviously one of the most important things that we can do from a security perspective is ensure that multi-factor authentication is switched on. Now, what we're able to do with conditional access is define different levels of policies that allow us to do things like block access to 365, block risky countries. We can enforce, this policy here enforces a trusted location and trusted device. Now, from a compliance perspective, the trusted location and trusted device policy can be really beneficial because what it allows us to do is put Microsoft 365 into a restricted mode. So you may be working with an external contractor, for example, where you're sharing very privileged information, or you might have customer data. And if the data is lost in any way, that could have a major impact on your organization. So you can see I've got two examples just here within this presentation that we can either do what the first one's describing is we can put an access denied message. So if someone's trying to access 365 from an untrusted device, so one that doesn't belong to your organization, we can actually prompt this to say, this isn't a trusted device, you're therefore not able to access the information. The second thing we can do over on the right-hand side is we can restrict access. So if it's on an untrusted device, rather than just blocking it altogether, we can limit the access they have to it. So we can prevent them from downloading it or printing, which you can see here. So there is some options to protect your data by using a conditional access policy that if they're not on a trusted device, they can still access some of your data and documents within 365, but it will be in this limited mode, so they can either download the data or get to another device. The next kind of tool product called data loss prevention. So what data loss prevention allows us to do is put rules and criteria in place that if someone is trying to share protected data, so this can be data that's automatically picked up by Microsoft 365. So in this scenario here on the right-hand side, it's looking for US and UK passport numbers. So if your organization holds sensitive data, you can either use the out-of-the-box detections as described here by Microsoft, or you can also build your own. So if you have perhaps a customer number or you have other sensitive data, you can build regex commands that will detect any type of data. But Microsoft have already built a huge amount of ready-to-go data loss prevention settings within here. You can see if I just jump into the portal, what we're able to see from here is you can see that there's a whole host of financial data. So whether you're based in the UK, US, or any other country, this can detect automatically a credit card number or SWIFT codes. It can search for UK medical data. So there's great use cases for this. It might even be protecting your users. It might be that they're not thinking through a phishing email that they've received and they're suddenly sending a credit card number to somebody over an email. What the data loss prevention side of things will do is anytime they try and send an email or share a document or even post in Microsoft Teams where there's an external party, this would flag up with a message, as you can see on the right-hand side, to say you're not able to send this message. It will block them from doing that. And it's quite easy if I jump into here, that when you're in the compliance center, we can go to the section on the left-hand side called data loss prevention. We can then go ahead and create a policy. So I'm just going to create a quick example policy for UK financial data. We can then give it a name, so it's automatically given us this UK financial data option. And what we're able to do then is to choose which areas we want this to impact. So we can either just focus it on SharePoint sites, but you can see this doesn't just protect Microsoft 365. Right down at the bottom here, we can even protect on-premise repositories. So if you have some on-prem data that you want to protect, provided you've got the supported server versions and such, we can protect that data and even go right down to the Power BI level here as well. So we can choose where we want this to work. We can then look at the template. So at the moment, we're protecting against these credit card numbers, but I can actually go ahead and customize this just to give you a little bit of insight. So the way these rules work is if it detects a low volume of UK financial data, so if somebody's perhaps sending one credit card number, your organization may say that that's acceptable and we expect that we'll be sending some types of financial data outside of the organization. So what we can do here is we can actually notify the users to say, be sure that you do, make sure that this is something that you want to do. So we're not blocking the action, we're just prompting them to say, are you sure you should be doing that? So as they send the email, it will pop up and say, are you sure you want to send a credit card number outside of the organization? It'll also send an alert to administrator who can be defined. That could be your data protection officer. And then they can kind of validate and make sure that's happened. What we can also do is if it detects a high volume of UK financial data, so if we've got multiple cards being sent, we can see that this one's actually restricting access to the external users. So we can prevent the user from sending the email altogether, or we can encrypt the email so they wouldn't be able to access that content anyway. So it's a great way here of being able to tweak and define how you want your data loss prevention to work. In the E5 plan, I've noted here that you can encrypt emails automatically. So that feature basically allows you to, if it detects, for example, a UK passport number, it can allow it to be sent to the individual, but it can encrypt that email. So the person who's receiving it can't then forward it on to somebody else. So there's some more advanced features as you upgrade through the plans. Another great feature which we have, which can really help protect if your organization has a lot of sensitive data, is we have a product called information protection. And what information protection allows you to do is we can see that I have this option in the top left-hand corner called sensitivity. See that Valto have their own labeling system. So we have things that we protect from an internal perspective, but I've also got these demo labels set up just here. Now, the idea of these labels is that if we want to protect something, say, for example, that I have something that's financial data, what I'm able to do is kind of say finance data, might have salary information and other pieces in there. What we would be able to do is, first of all, place a watermark on the background of the document. So just in a second here, you'll see, okay, perhaps there isn't a watermark set up on this one at the moment, but what would usually happen is a watermark would appear just in the background that would say finance data. You can see just at the bottom here that it's also got this label demo finance, and each of the labels also has a description associated with it. So you can see as I hover over the finance data for Valto, you can see that there's a description about what that label does. Now, ultimately, it's not just about labeling. Once this has been classified with the finance data, effectively what it will do is always check now every time this file's opened to see if you're in the finance group. So if it's emailed outside of the business, if it's stolen on a USB stick, if anything is being sent, this data is being sent outside of the organization or even inside of the organization, it will always check to see if it's got the finance people within it. So it's really great for where you have sensitive data like a employment contract or a customer database. By flagging this with these labels, it will prevent people from sharing data outside of your organization or across the business as well. So you can see here, there's some examples that we just covered off. If it's stolen on a USB stick, if it's emailed outside of the organization, if it's sent to the wrong internal users, or even if there's been a data breach from malware. So there's lots of options there that will protect your data moving forward. The next piece that we have around compliance is data lifecycle management. So this basically is allowing us to put things in place to handle the retention of your documents. So for example, when we had the new GDPR processes that had come up recently, there was a whole host of files and such that needed to be cleansed from people's file servers and emails where we were holding personal data that we shouldn't be keeping. So if I jump into the compliance center just here, I've got this section over here called the data lifecycle management. And what I'm able to do is go into this area called labels, and I can go ahead and I can create a label just here. So if I just create this one called demo finance, and you can see as I start to configure this, I can define how long I want to keep the data for. So finance is a great example because generally we have a need in finance that we should be keeping data for a period of time. It might be 7 years that we need to hold financial records for, that if in case there's ever an audit, we can recover that. But perhaps after 7 years, we're not interested and we don't need to keep that anymore. We can say when the retention period starts. So it can be when we add the data into the library. It could be when we label them, or it could be when they're last modified. So if you're constantly updating a document, this 7 years would carry on ticking away forever until it's not been modified and 7 years is met. The other great thing though is we can actually use these for events. So it could be that you have an employment contract, or it could be that you have a customer agreement. And you may say, well, actually, what we want to do is 10 years after that customer agreement's expired, we want to delete it automatically. The other important thing here is, though, that you don't want to ever delete a customer agreement while it's live. So what we do is we move to the next stage. You can see we have a number of different options that we can use. The first one is we can delete items automatically. So we can say just after it's hit 10 years old, we would just want to purge them from our system. Or we can start a disposition review, and you can build 5 stages of approval in here, where you can say stage 1 is a finance approval, and we can drop in the people in finance that should look to review that. The second stage is management level approval. So you can build in disposition reviews, and what will happen is when those documents reach 7 years or 10 years old, that's the point in which these reviewers would then kind of go through and say, we're going to keep it or we're going to delete it. They can decide what they want to do. The other options just down here is you can do some more advanced things as well. So you might want to run a Power Automate flow. So for example, we have an employee onboarding and offboarding system. And when one of our staff leaves, we trigger a Power Automate flow, which automatically then deletes all of that employment contract and employment history after they've been with us, after they've left for 7 years. So utilizing that type of functionality can be quite powerful. So the way these work, just as examples, I've got one here for customers. After a year, this goes through a review process, and then they can decide whether they want to keep it or delete it. We have a finance label, which is used basically to review and protect finance files for 7 years. And we've got this CVs one. So whenever we're doing a recruitment process, we put all of our CVs into the same folder. And then after 60 days or 2 months, it'll automatically delete those files from the system. So we don't want to hold that personal data for longer than we need to. Next piece, within the Compliance Center, we have the ability for subject access requests. So this can be a very time-consuming process. If you're getting these frequently, or even if you just get them on an ad hoc basis, they can take a lot of time to deal with and pick up. So what a subject right request allows you to do is basically go ahead and search the platform for all of the employee detail. So if, for example, one of our employees asks for a subject access request, we can search the whole of Microsoft 365 for all of the related data within the platform. And we are able to then create a report and come back to that. So you can see here one I created earlier. Got one for Kieran. And what it's done is it's searched the whole of our Microsoft 365 environment. So it searched mailboxes, sites, public folders, and it will then come back with all of the data that it's found. And you're able to create an export of this that can then be sanitized and then sent on as needed. So it's a very good way of being able to automatically handle those data subject requests. A very similar functionality is we also have eDiscovery. The benefit of this, though, is that what we're able to do with this side of things is it's more for perhaps legal hold and legal requests. So if your organization's going through a legal situation where a project may have gone wrong, maybe project Y, what we can actually do is we can go ahead and do a search across the whole of the Microsoft 365 environment for the word project Y, and it'll come back across Exchange and SharePoint and Teams and other locations wherever project Y has been mentioned, and it can actually create an export where that data can then be exported and then sent to a legal situation or solicitors or whatever, so they can pick that up. The other great thing that we're able to do is put this in legal hold. So perhaps one of the directors in your organization was involved in project Y, and they're now suddenly doing something untoward. They're trying to cover their tracks. They're trying to delete emails or messages or files that associate with project Y. So what with legal hold, what we can do is we can actually put those areas into legal hold. So while the suspicious person's going ahead and deleting them, while it appears to them that they're being removed from the platform, what's actually happening is that they're still being held in this legal situation so that you can recover them and you can actually see stuff that's been deleted. So it's a way of perhaps whilst they're covering their tracks, if legal holds applied, you can actually go ahead then and use it to say, well, he's been deleting this stuff, so perhaps this is where the suspicious area is. Another great feature that we have is the auditing system. So absolutely everything in Microsoft 365 is logged. So from a legal perspective or from a compliance perspective, if you ever have a need to go back and see what's happening, the audit basically allows us to go and look at the audit log and see what's happening within the organization. So you can see if you've got most Microsoft 365 plans, you can go back to this for 90 days. If you have an E5 plan, you can go back to this for 1 year. There are options as well if you want to keep it indefinitely. Your organization might have a legal obligation that you need to keep this for much longer, like a regulated industry, like a bank might need to keep this for 7 years or even more. So what we're able to do is this can be exported to other systems, like Azure Sentinel is something that we use a lot with our customers, or you can use any other security information event management systems. You might use something like Alien where you want to move it into there. But what the audit log allows you to do is you can set a time range. So if you wanted to monitor a particular user for their activity, we can search for a user here. And we can even search for the type of activity. So you can see when I last accessed files, when I downloaded them, when I shared them. So I can pretty much look at any aspect of 365, and I can use this to kind of, if there's been a problem or if I'm trying to debug a situation or there's a compliance matter I'm trying to deal with, I can basically go ahead and I can search for that. And you'll see now that what's happening in the background is it's queued this job. And perhaps in 5 minutes or so, this will come back with a list of all the activities that's happened over the past 24 hours. So again, this is a great way of being able to monitor activities. The Azure Sentinel, really powerful, because what Azure Sentinel can add to those logs is it can start looking at what's called rule books. So if there's things that are happening in your 365 environment that are strange and you're not constantly monitoring this audit log, then what Microsoft have created in Azure Sentinel is something called playbooks. And a playbook is where they've identified strange behaviors, like, for example, there's been a mass sharing event, and it can be used then for you guys to monitor your Azure your audit logs and then feed back to you around alerts where strange behavior is happening that you should pick up. So Azure Sentinel adds a lot more functionality than what's available out of the box. We also have within the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center the ability for alerts. So the alerts are things that can be picked up by your compliance team that are basically making sure that they're being picked up. So you can see here we have an impossible travel activity. So this alert's been flagged because there's been a situation where somebody's signed in from perhaps the UK, but they've also then suddenly signed in America. So this could happen if the user's using a VPN, but it could also be happening because there is an attack, there's a breach that's happened. So it's important that that's checked. So with most of our organizations that we work with, we're routing those to some sort of support or compliance email address. The alerts can be tweaked. So you get a lot of junk ones in there that aren't worth perhaps following up, but it's important that you kind of tweak this so that the alerts that are coming through are picked up by somebody within the organization. We also have the advanced features for Microsoft 365 E5 licensing. So what we can do is we can have one of the best features that we have with Microsoft 365 E5 licenses is what's called insider risk management. Now, what insider risk management can do is it can detect activities where users are doing some strange behavior. So this is a great example that you can see here, data theft and data theft by departing users. So if you've got a HR system, you can either plug it into your existing HR system, or you can use any existing one that you have. But this will basically determine when a user's handed their resignation in. So say a sales guy has just handed their notice in within your organization, you would either put it into your HR system, or you could perhaps use SharePoint onboarding system if needed. And you would put that their resignation date was today. So they now have 30 days left to run through in that process. What this will do then is start to monitor that activity retrospectively if it's picked it up, but it will kind of detect activity. So if that sales guy is suddenly downloading all of the customer documentation, then this will start to pick that up and start to feed back alerts to say, Hugh's resignation is at the end of the month. However, he suddenly started sending more emails externally, or he suddenly started downloading a lot more documents. So it gives you the opportunity then to speak to that individual about data theft. You can see they're working on this as well. They're adding things like health record misuse in, so using things like machine learning and AI and security policy violations. So if you wanted to have a demo in insider risk management, it's something we could set up a call for. It takes about an hour and we can run through how this works and the benefits of it. So just in terms of planning your compliance strategy, what we wanted to do today is basically run through the different features, the building blocks of that compliance strategy. What we do have, it says it provided in coming days, but it's actually available now. So we do have a downloadable white paper that explains how to build a compliance strategy and how to run through it. The understanding of the functionality that you have available to you, if you're on Business Premium or E3, you'll be able to do everything that I showed today. If you're on something like a Business Standard or an E1 plan, you're going to be really limited in terms of the functionality that you have. So it's worth a conversation with us if you're looking to implement DLP, so we can talk you through what's needed. We also recommend that you look at planning your labeling requirements. So it's worth taking a step back and thinking which departments require retention. The common ones like finance and HR will likely need this, and which departments are going to need sensitivity labels. It's better to work with those departments who have an immediate requirement and then kind of build out from there. So don't try and do the whole organization on day one. Work with the departments like finances and HR who have an immediate requirement for labeling. We talked about tailoring those alerting functionality, which we cover off in our document in more detail. There's a whole host of compliance roles available within 365. So if you're a smaller organization, you'll likely wear many hats, but our enterprise customers will have dedicated people in dedicated roles. So all of the compliance functionality that I showed today has individual roles for it. So if you need somebody that can run data subject requests and a different person that can run DLP, there's an individual role that can be configured for each one. If that's something you're interested in, give us a shout. We can show you the roles that are available and we can talk you through how those should be configured. And then finally, whilst this is about compliance, obviously there is a lot of security that can be implemented. So like conditional access we talked about today, that is security, but implementing that functionality can prevent data loss and restrict contractors from taking data that they shouldn't. So it's worth considering both sides of that. We've got some useful links here. The first one I said at the beginning, the Microsoft 365 licensing comparison. So if you just take a picture of that QR code, that'll take you to the Microsoft comparison website. Like I said, just get in touch with us though if you want me to talk you through licenses. Microsoft and the way they explain licenses can be really confusing. We can really help you kind of simplify that down. And over on the right-hand side is Microsoft's own recommendations for security and compliance guidance. So they've got some great resources on how to implement this stuff on there. We've also got our purview strategy guide. I keep calling it compliance all the way through this, but we should really get into the habit of calling it purview. So this is our white paper. If you want to go ahead and download that, then download the QR code just there, take a picture of that. And if you have any other questions around it, just give me a shout. And then finally, it's just over to Q&A. So Jade, is there any questions?
Yep, there is one that says, can you mix E3 and E5 licenses? So for example, a finance team have E5 licenses and can use automated labeling.
Yeah, so it's really common in organizations that will look to have a mixture of licenses. A lot of our customers, even small businesses that might only have 10 users, we recommend that the VIPs in the organization have an E5 license because there's a whole host of additional protections that can be put in place that you don't get as part of the standard ones. So yeah, the example that you've given, let's give finance team an E5 license and give everyone else an E3 license is perfectly fine and a recommended approach. Not everybody in the organization needs to have the same license. More questions, Jade, or any more questions from the audience before we look to wrap up?
That's all that's come through so far.
Brill. Okay, well, we'll look to wrap up then. Thank you very much, guys. We've got another webinar, which is in a week or so's time, and the focus on that will be getting the most out of Microsoft Teams. So we'll be sending an email out to everybody so you can look to join that soon. Thank you very much, everyone.